Hi, this is Randal Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Newcomb joins me. We're going to talk about Vaadin, a Java-based web application framework that allows you to make rich desktop applications. You're going to want to see this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FLOSS Weekly is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Newcomb. Episode 187 for October 19th, 2011. Vaadin. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Ford, featuring Wi-Fi connectivity with the available Sync and My Ford Touch. Now your car can be a Wi-Fi hotspot. Check it out in the new 2012 Ford Focus and at Ford.com/technology. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. We have the show weekly, even though I'm not necessarily here weekly. I'm your host, Randal Schwartz, back again in the big chair. Actually, a chair you can't even see because I'm sitting, it has no back, so you can't see, but I am back in the big chair in spite of the fact there's no chair back on this. Yes, I've been away for 4 weeks to basically be on a cruise. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the show, but I am, of course, always joined by a great co-host, this week's co-host, Newcomb. Come back and say hello.
Hey, Randal. It's nice to be back and a little weird to be in the co-hosting chair here for for a change.
And I do want to thank you. You did some great shows while I was gone. It was really, you know, I would eagerly download them even over satellite on the ship, which is like incredibly slow. But I go, come on, show 186, go, show 186. So I was listening to them every week, and you guys did a great job taking over for me just to keep the show weekly, and I really appreciate that. And also just to give a different perspective for the hosting part of it. I appreciate you doing that. So thank you, and guys, for hosting for me.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully we didn't lead things astray too much while you were gone.
No. Apparently, we still have an audience. So it may be an audience of one, but here we are. Hello, audience member. It's really great that you have here. Just want to say I'm also back in Culver City, and so I just want to give a quick shout out to Media Temple for providing me the space and the giant microphone to my left to be able to have this take time out of the busy week that I have. I mean, I've been gone for 3 weeks, and they still let me have a couple hours off to go do this. So I think that's really cool for them. But the show is not about us. The show is about the guests that we bring on. And this week's guest is, I'm going to mispronounce this. I think it's Joonas. I think that's the way you pronounce it. Joonas Lehtinen, something like that. And I'll have to ask him how it's actually done because I have a hard time with all these European names and stuff. So Joonas is the founder and CEO of the company behind the Vaadin project. Vaadin? I think it's Vaadin project. And Vaadin is a web framework. Oh my God, another web framework. No, this one's kind of special. It's kind of cool. So what this does is it runs server side. And it's written in Java, so you write your code in Java, and then the client the client side is just pure JavaScript and stuff. But you don't have to write that stuff. It's just all smart widgets and stuff. So it makes a really rich desktop web application over on the client side. And so we'll have to talk to Joonas about how this all actually works. But we'll get to that in a moment. Oh, actually, any comments on that before we go on?
Well, just doing some research on this, leading up to the show, I'm kind of curious to see how this compares with the other frameworks that are out there. How does this thing scale? They've got some really nice documentation and examples on their website, which basically point and click, here's how you do this, here's what this looks like. So, I mean, it looks really cool, but it'll just be interesting to see how it compares with other frameworks, how easy it is to implement.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many of these frameworks out there. I mean, we've had like what, about a dozen on this show. Yeah. So yep. I've got a few dozen actually coming up on the short list. So that's going to be kind of fun. So great. So we'll get to Joonas in just a moment, but I just have to say a little bit of pay for the bills here a little bit by saying we now have a sponsor for the show. We do have a sponsor for the show, and this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Ford. One of the latest technologies from Ford's Sync with the My Ford Touch is Wi-Fi connectivity. Wow. This feature can turn your car into a Wi-Fi hotspot. Now that sounds useful, giving you and your passengers internet access for up to 5 devices at once. So here's how it works. You establish an internet connection to the Wi-Fi hotspot by plugging in the portable wireless access card from one of the wireless carriers into a USB port located in the center armrest console or the glove compartment or under the radio, depending on the model. Or if you have a BlackBerry, you can just connect the hotspot wirelessly via Bluetooth. And then next, you connect up to 5 Wi-Fi-enabled devices to the hotspot using a secure password, and then you're in. Now, you or your passengers can access music, browse the internet, download apps, or play games via Wi-Fi. Probably not you if you're driving. That's a bad idea. They can connect their laptops, tablet, mobile phones, or other internet devices to the hotspot, up to 5 devices at once, all without additional subscription or expense. Ford Sync with My Ford Touch, featuring Wi-Fi connectivity, is available in the 2012 Ford Focus. You can learn more about this and other technologies Ford is bringing to its vehicles at ford.com/technology. So go check that out. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our guest. Joonas, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great. So I both mispronounced your name probably at the beginning of the show. You want to go ahead and tell me how you say it?
So it's Joonas Lehtinen.
Very good, which is something, I'll just say Joonas because I think it's probably the only part of it I'm going to get correct. So welcome to the show. And I gave us sort of an overview of, now I'm probably even mispronouncing the name of the product too, Vaadin, something like that. Can you give us sort of the 30,000-foot overview of what this product is about?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it's pronounced Vaadin. So
Vaadin, okay.
Vaadin is actually, it's a framework for building rich web applications. That meaning that you can build a web application that looks and feels like a desktop application, runs in any kind of web browser, even the old ones, even on mobile, no plugins. But the difference here is that you are writing the whole UI layer on the server side. So you're actually doing all the coding and all the user interface runtime is running on the server side. And this means that you can write it in Java or any kind of language that runs on the server side. No JavaScript, no HTML coding at all.
Now, obviously, it's running with JavaScript, though. I mean, is it that the framework, is the Vaadin framework providing all the JavaScript and HTML then based on what your Java code looks like?
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically, you could see it as a kind of terminal solution. We are sending a small terminal application to the client side that's written in JavaScript, and that kind of goes back to the server side and asks your application, hey, what do you want to show on screen? And your application says, hey, I want to see button on the right and tree on the left, and it just renders that.
Okay, so from the Java side, I'm programming my basic interface then to make this happen. I'm programming in some sort of Java editor or something like Eclipse or whatever I'm familiar with. And I'm writing probably GUI style commands, create a window, create a slider bar in the window, set it at a third of the way across, that sort of commands, right?
Exactly. So it's like a components-based framework in such sense. You are just adding new buttons, trees, tables, and so forth, all kind of UI components on your application and wiring them up. And everything is done in a kind of programmatic way. You can use any language. It doesn't have to be Java. It can be, let's say, Scala or Ruby or what have you on the server side. And just build the UI using the component APIs.
Okay, obviously, if you're using Ruby, you're talking about JRuby. It has to be something that's in the JVM.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and so, in fact, I was just going to ask about Scala, but and so because we've had Scala on the show before, but so let me get back to like the basic workflow then. So I'm interfacing with Eclipse or whatever I have to edit my Java code if I'm using Java anyway, and I'm basically I decide the flow of my program as I would a typical UI program, which is that I'm going to have perhaps this particular button wires up a pop-up window, and in that window I might have a certain layout, and once that layout is complete, there'd be some, save or cancel button that would then pop me back to the main part of my application. I design this as a typical UI application then.
Yeah, exactly. This is, even though you're writing a web application in the end, so as it's used on the web browser, you don't have to think in kind of terms of pages and page flows at all. You could think that you are building a desktop application and wiring those components together and let Vaadin to do all the transformation to the web for you.
Okay, and so what happens then is that this Java application then, we'll stick with Java, we'll talk about some of the other language a little bit later to see how that's different. But so what this Java application I'm writing then, I bring it into the framework, compile it, link it, whatever gets done with Java. And then I put this on my web server, like maybe under Tomcat or something?
Yeah, any kind of web server that can serve servlets or Java applications or portlets will do.
And then this will be attached, my application will be attached to a particular URL. So then the client comes and visits that URL. And then what happens again? It connects up and sends some stuff down?
Yeah, basically when you first go in, the server sends you a page. And on that page, there is a small snippet of JavaScript. And that JavaScript connects back to the server side and asks the server-side application what kind of things you want to show on screen. And it renders those things. So it's the JavaScript that gets sent back to the client side doesn't know anything about your application. It just knows how to draw the buttons and trees on the screen and send back those events that the user is clicking to your application on the server side.
So this is done essentially through AJAX calls, and although even though it's probably not the X of AJAX, but it's asynchronous calls then.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, you could even use like WebSockets or server push for the communications, but the default is AJAX.
Okay, and so the browser is sitting in a continual state of just simply asking the server, what do you want me to do? And the server is then saying things like, well, I want you to put up a window here, and I want you to draw this vertical widget here using standard HTML. So the browser is essentially being very dumb here at this point, right? Yeah,
we are kind of treating the browser as, I would say, X11 terminal in that sense.
Okay. And so all of the widgets that are defined there, of course, have to be compatible with basic HTML, or at least to the portable subset of HTML you have across your browsers. Let's talk about browser support in a few minutes, too, because I'm curious about that. So you're basically building up your rich-looking widgets with basic HTML.
Actually, we have 3 levels in Vaadin. The first, the most used level is program on the server side. But that JavaScript that gets sent to the browser side, it's actually Google Web Toolkit based. And that does all the rendering. So you have second level of abstraction, basically programming Java on the client side. And then the third level of abstraction, if you really want to go through that Java level also, it's basically writing JavaScript on the client side. So you can choose which level you want to program in, and you can spend most of the time in the environment you're most comfortable in, basically on the server side, and then go through the abstraction layers if you want to kind of do something more detailed, like draw animations and that kind of stuff.
I was just going to ask about the relationship of this with GWT. We haven't had GWT on the show yet, but that's sort of if I remember right, that's some sort of like generic widget toolkit that Google developed for their applications.
Yeah, it's actually quite a brilliant idea. What they are doing, they are compiling your Java application together with some standard libraries to JavaScript. And the great thing here is that while Google Web Toolkit compiles your Java application into JavaScript, it compiles it to multiple versions. So basically one version for each browser. So it can tackle many of those cross-browser issues or kind of browser compatibility issues quite automatically. And also at the same time, because you are writing everything on the Java with the Google Web Toolkit, it's much easier to build modular applications with it. So it's really good for big applications if you want to write on the server on the client side.
So just real quick, you are coming in really clearly. It's almost like you're sitting next door to us. Where are you actually calling from?
Actually from Finland.
Oh, well, there you go, the bandwidth. I mean, really, you are really clearly. I would have thought you were coming from San Francisco or something, just because you're so clear. As you guys were talking, I was just wondering, what's the literal translation for Vaadin, and why did you pick that?
Vaadin is we were kind of looking for a new name for the framework, and Vaadin is a Finnish word meaning reindeer, or actually more specifically female reindeer. So there is no particular reason for picking that name, but we wanted to have a name that is kind of free around the world, and we're going to get Vaadin.com for it. Right.
Well, that helps you certainly with, make sure that nobody else is going to come back and say, oh, we were the first one. I guess zoos, you got to be careful of zoos. They're pretty aggressive when it comes to taking their words. No, I'm just kidding. That sounds like a good enough reason to me. So I understand, I get kind of the, offloading this to the back end, and using Java. I mean, does this help with security at all by not doing a lot of this stuff in JavaScript? Is that one reason you might use this?
Yeah, I think it's quite important reason actually, because it seems that the web is going a lot into those, I would say, rich, thick web applications where everything done on the browser side in JavaScript or on top of some plugin. And in those cases, you could see them as a white box from a breaking point of view. You can read the code, you can evaluate the code, you can change the code, you can try to guess what kind of APIs there are on the server side and try to rate those. But in Vaadin's case, because everything runs on the server side, it's more of a black box. And Vaadin is handling all the communications between the browser and the server. So it can optimize and try to put a lot of security measures on top of it automatically.
Right. Do you use secure sessions by default, or is that something that's basically up to the deployment?
Yeah, it's up to the deployment.
Okay. The other question I had is around comparing this to other ways of doing it. So obviously, HTML5, for example, is really big right now. I mean, is there a reason? We talked a little bit about security, but is there a reason why I would choose Vaadin instead of going the HTML5 approach?
It's actually not the kind of choosing one either over another, because Vaadin is sitting on top of HTML5. Everything that can be done in HTML5, or almost everything that can be done in HTML5, can be done in Vaadin. Vaadin just puts 2 abstraction layers on top of that. So you can kind of be most of the time in a bit simpler environment, and when you want to have the full power of HTML5, you can have it.
How difficult is it to scale if I'm using this over more traditional deployment? Does it scale as well, or I guess in this case, since it's all running server side, it might even scale better in some ways if you can replicate things, for example, to various websites and so forth?
Actually not. So from a scalability point of view, doing everything on the client side would be the better option. So if you want to build the next Gmail, you probably don't want to use Vaadin in that case. Our kind of optimization target has been to make the program model as simple as possible and kind of sacrifice a bit of scaling. Okay, that said, our tests show that you can run maybe 10,000 or so concurrent users for a ticketing application per server. So if you have 10 servers, you can serve quite large application.
Right. And, one of the things that I really like about what you've done here is the examples in the demo. We've been showing some of them, actually, if you're watching the live stream or watching the video. We've been showing some of the examples and demos that you've got. And I think that's really great. It really helps, kind of gives people a head start in terms of getting going with this. Is that something that you saw as crucial to kind of getting users to jump in and start using Vaadin?
Of course, I think because this is a user interface framework, and one of the core values is that it looks pretty. So it's really, really important you have components that look pretty, and then programmers can go and grab those components and compose their application out of pretty components. So the result might be pretty or it might be bad, depending how you're combining those. But also one kind of notable thing in the sample demo that you're looking is that for each component, when you open the component, there is a button, show source code. So it kind of, at the same time, teaches how to use those components. You can just go and cut and paste that source code into your application, and boom, then you have that kind of part of the demo in your application directly.
Right. This seems like a real scratch-your-own-itch kind of thing here. Is that how this got started? How did you come up with this idea of doing it this way? It's kind of a I wouldn't necessarily consider it the most intuitive way when all these other technologies already existed. So how did you come up with this idea to do it this way?
Yeah, actually, I think many of the open source framework get started by having an itch to scratch. And that was the story also in our case. I was leading a team that were building a virtual hospital in Europe in, I think, 98, 99. And we built up a quite large web application. I think we had 100,000 or 200,000 lines of Perl code running on top of DB2 and kind of really traditional environment serving web pages. And it became like really, really hard to maintain the code base, really hard to support all the browsers available at that time. So we decided that we have to do something and started the company to build this framework in year 2000 already. So it has quite long roots in the history.
And is this something that, in terms of browser compatibility, I'm guessing since I think the way you described it was it basically uses that little JavaScript code to go back and fetch the instructions, so to speak. So is this something that's pretty compatible across all browsers?
Yeah, that was one of the kind of founding principles in Vaadin and starting the company around it. So we kind of thought that back in year 2000 there were like Netscape and IE5 and that kind of browsers that were really hard to program with when you wanted to support all of them. And we thought that, hey, maybe this compatibility issue is not going away. Maybe there are more and more terminals coming in. And it seems that just happened. Now we have a bunch of terminals that actually support HTML5 quite well, but also in the kind of corporate environment you have to support all browsers like IE6. And as well, there is a bunch of mobile terminals like iPhone and Android and so forth. And when you put all of those in the mix, it becomes really hard to support all of them without some kind of framework on top of just HTML5.
Yeah, that's the next thing I was going to ask about was mobile. Is this something that, obviously, if I'm developing this for end users, I'm going to make sure, I'm going to, in this day and age anyway, I want to make sure that tablets and phones are supported. I mean, how does that work?
Basically, anything you do in Vaadin is working directly on mobile browsers also. So we support all the touch events and so forth. But of course, if you're targeting a smartphone type of screen, like really small screen operated with finger, then you have to design the UI to support that use case. Putting, let's say, that sampler demo directly on iPhone, it's not too usable that way. But because the technology supports those mobile browsers also, it's quite easy to do one view that you can show to iPhone and another view you can show on desktop.
All right, that's great. Obviously, that's what you need. So a question that's coming in from the chat room, and I was kind of wondering this as well. What do you use for an IDE if you're using this? Is this something that works directly with something like Eclipse, or how do you, is there a special IDE you need to use?
Yes and no. Vaadin in the end is just one jar file. So you can drop that into your Java project and use any kind of IDE. You can use YI or Emacs or whatever, but we have special support for Eclipse, so there is Eclipse plugin that helps a lot in different kind of places. It creates new themes for you, it creates new components for you. There is a Visual Composer where you can draw the layouts and that kind of stuff. There is also some basic level support for NetBeans, and I think people are using it with IDEA quite a lot, even though there is no direct support. We support Maven, and that Maven support is quite handy with IDEA.
Cool. Hey, I've got a couple questions here now. So how is this rich enough to make something like Google Maps? I mean, I'm trying to think of how detailed these widgets are.
We wrap Google Maps. So if you, there is tons of components for Vaadin, and one of those is actually a wrapper around Google Maps. So the philosophy here is that when you want to do something like really rich, let's say 3D graphics, you build Vaadin widget for it, or actually client-side widget using Google Web Toolkit, and wrap that with Vaadin, and then you can use it from the server side. So basically, if you have a team of developers where a couple of guys are really familiar with the client-side stuff, they can do new widgets, and the rest of the team can just use those. So we kind of support that kind of encapsulation really heavily.
Okay, so basically out of the box, though, the kinds of interactions I have with Google Maps might be a little tricky to do with Vaadin then.
Yes, but out of the box, you can go to Vaadin directory and click a button and download Google Maps component for Vaadin. So it's more like packaging those interactions in external components and using them from Vaadin.
Yeah, and as I was researching for this show, I saw the directory, which is really sort of a fascinating thing. It's like a marketplace full of solutions that people have built on top of Vaadin.
Yeah, that's actually one of the most important things we have been doing lately. A couple of years ago, we thought that we were seeing that a lot of app ecosystems were growing really, really fast on different platforms, and we thought maybe also our framework should be modular. And it turned out that it's really, really good for helping communities to work together. Kind of UI frameworks are quite complex, and it's really, really hard to accept contributions to the core framework. But at the same time, it's really, very easy to allow people to upload their own UI widgets to a centralized place where everybody could grab those and reuse those in their own projects.
Well, I know that was a really important thing to having Perl sort of kick off in the mid-90s. It was the ability of the CPAN to allow people to share their solutions to problems in reusable components. So I'm glad you see that you've gone the same direction with this, at least having a way of having that sort of people meeting up with solutions. And I'm sort of curious also about the beginning of this. Did you start this project, and what if you or how did this? What problem were you solving when this project started?
You mean the whole Vaadin project?
Yes.
Yeah, as I said, we were building a virtual hospital and found out that we have to have some kind of better tooling for building such systems. So in the first place, we actually were building Vaadin for ourselves. And I think the first public release of the framework came in late 2002. So then we kind of saw that, hey, this tool could be useful for all other people's also, and we open sourced it and released it publicly. Actually, the name was Millstone back in the days.
And what was the thinking behind having it be open source? Because I know a lot of projects struggle with this, about thinking about whether they want to go open source or not. Of course, we're not talking to the ones that aren't. So I want to talk to the ones that have actually decided to do it. And what was your thinking back then? How did you come about to say, well, open source probably would be better for us than keeping it closed source?
I'm not sure if we had like really kind of strong business thinking in the beginning. We were always using Linux operating system, where we were kind of grown up with the open source tooling, and we liked open source. So we thought that, hey, it would be great to give this tool to other people's also, and kind of get comments in, and maybe we are also expecting contributions a lot at that point of time, and thinking maybe we could build some business models on top of the open source tool. But it took a really long time to kind of get better ideas on how to do business on top of open source.
Now, you said you were opening up partially to get contributions. Have you gotten a lot of contributions from the community back to the core, or has it mostly just been in the forms of plugins?
We have some random contributions to the core, but they are quite rare. When in comparison to the directory, it has been really lively and getting, I think there was over 200 plugins for Vaadin at the moment in the directory. So that's the kind of place and a way to contribute. And actually, even our core development team, they started to use directory in the same way. So when they are building a new feature for Vaadin core, they are quite often first pushing that as an add-on for the Vaadin, so that they can give it to people to test and get comments and maybe modify the APIs a bit before they are integrating that to core.
So the core is mostly being done by a small team of people in or near your company then?
Exactly.
Okay, and with a few contributions from the outside, what's your development process? Do you have like good unit tests and everything for all this?
Yeah, actually the testing side is really complex because this framework, we are kind of guaranteeing for all the persons using the framework that if you are using these components, they are working in all the different browsers and all the different Java servers and portals. So we are supporting tons of different platforms at the same time and guaranteeing that those are working, and this creates a really complicated testing situation. So what we have been doing is running, I think we have some thousands of unit tests at the moment, and for each build we are running them on over 100 virtual machines in parallel to test all kinds of stuff like different servers, even taking screenshots with all the different browsers for all the different components and comparing them pixel by pixel to each other.
Wow, the expense of running all that, obviously you factor that into your business model, but I'm curious, if I'm a plugin developer, I'm also be like wondering if it ran on all those different platforms. Are you already, or do you have a mechanism by which the plugins can be tested on all those setups as well?
Not yet at the moment, at least. That's actually an interesting idea that we haven't been thinking too much. But maybe we could open up our testing facilities for plugin developers also, so that they could test their plugins and then kind of seeing the support the browser's state in the directory, which are actually tested against the plugin.
I'd certainly expect that to be a revenue model, because that's I wouldn't expect to get that kind of service for free as a developer of even of an open source product. So it sounds like you got a possible revenue stream there. So just throwing that out there for you. So are you able to test all the way down to the end? I mean, you said you're looking at like bit outputs to compare screenshots. Are you doing something like Selenium as well?
Yeah, actually, the whole testing system is built on top of Selenium. We are using that really, really heavily, but we have kind of built on top of Selenium our own testing tool. We call that Vaadin Test Bench. That's actually a commercial tool that we are selling to the users of Vaadin. But the interesting thing here is that we have added a couple of things on top of Selenium. First, that being able to take screenshots and comparing them to each other pixel by pixel, seeing regressions on a CSS and a pixel level, as well as it includes some extra support for Vaadin components to make them easier to test.
Cool. And what's the deployment like for this? Are there any large projects that are using this that you can tell us about?
I don't have any kind of projects I could tell about, because it's mostly used in large enterprises and behind the firewalls for kind of internal projects. The larger project that I have been seeing is something like, I think, 500,000 code lines. So it has been used in a really, really huge projects. And also it's used, I like to say it's used mostly for like boring business applications like banking and finances and taxes and governmental organizations. And unfortunately, those applications are such that really, really hard to get reference permissions for those.
Now, since this is all in Java, I can easily integrate it into whatever sort of Java framework I might have in terms of accessing existing infrastructure, databases, networking, things like that, right?
Yes. So that is actually one of the core values. When you're writing a Vaadin application, you can kind of leave the communication part between the server and the client, as well as the client rendering part, away from your code. So you're basically writing just the server side. So you are basically erasing two layers of complexity from your application. And because you're running on the server side, you can call the backend service directly. So if you have, if you're doing some UI stuff, you can go synchronously to any kind of backend service, like going back to database and ask things and just show them on screen. So this is much simpler model than from the client side, call some asynchronous service on a web server and then delegating that back to the database and then back to the client side and then in a asynchronous callback putting it on screen.
Right. So for my framework, the way I'm looking at it is like if one of my buttons needed to constantly update, for example, the number of, say you're selling tickets, it's the number of tickets left, only 19 left, only 17 left, only 15 left. I could actually have it sort of looping like that on the server side, asking the database for whatever the number is and constantly updating its own title, right?
Yeah, that would be possible. It doesn't sound like a good implementation though, but
yeah. Possible. Well, I come up with crazy stuff every once in a while. That's what I do.
It's a good way to explain it though.
Yeah, the best thing is like, I think this is always the great interaction I have with people who build frameworks. It's like I come up with these ideas, they go, nah, you don't want to do that. I go, no, actually I think it sounds pretty cool. I want to do it. And then I see how close we can get with the actual framework. So that's me being a web programmer though. Let's see. I think I'm looking at, okay, so in terms of the current size, the company's been around for a while. You're deploying, you've got large people using the applications, mostly for internal stuff. So we wouldn't have a lot of things we could go to, say, out on the web and actually see this in action then, right?
Some have been using it for websites. I try to recommend people not to use it for websites, but if you want to see a large Vaadin-based website, you could go to javablackbelt.com. It's kind of training sites and really popular in Europe. They're training Java developers there. And I think they have like something 70,000 or 100,000 members in the site. But mostly it's not that good choice for websites. It's more like for the administrative part of the website behind the scenes, And I think the best use case have been moving those old desktop applications to the web. So having, let's say, Visual Basic application or Swing application, moving that to web application with Vaadin is quite straightforward task, as the program model is the same.
Okay, so in terms of like my understanding of frameworks, this is more like Seaside, which I'm really familiar with, which is a really great way of creating an interaction where all the session-based information stuff gets swept behind the scenes, and not so much like, say, maybe a templating system, like maybe for content management or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's, if you want to build like complete solution where you want to show some kind of pages on the website, it's good to combine with other technologies. For example, we are using on Vaadin.com, it's a liferay site. So most of the portal has been done with plain liferay, and then there are parts like the Vaadin directory built and embedded in Vaadin. And the division is that if the part is like really interactive and application-like, then we build that in Vaadin. But if it looks like more like a bunch of web pages, then it's maybe better to build with like JSPs or string MVC or that kind of technologies.
I was just going to ask about that. I'm not really familiar with a lot of Java web frameworks. So I was just going to ask about Vaadin.com. So you built most of this using another framework that's good for mostly static sites, but you can still drop in a Vaadin component into the middle of one of these pages then? Yeah,
actually, it's a liferay portal. So it's one of the, I think it's probably the most popular open source Java portal at the moment. Mm-hmm. And the cool thing here is that it also ships with Vaadin built in. So if you start to use liferay for your CMS part of your application and use their tooling, you can actually just create a new Vaadin portlet there. And then you can embed Vaadin on any part of the web page. But actually, you don't have to even use any portals. You can embed Vaadin on any kind of web page. Just put the div on your PHP page and say to div, below the div that, hey, I want to run this JavaScript that starts Vaadin, and then Vaadin server starts pushing the UIs on your PHP page.
Okay, so you interact with it as wow. So it's actually the JavaScript that's triggering it. That's interesting.
But if that's the case, how do you is there any way to cluster it? I'm just trying to think. I mean, if you've got a web page that's always pointing to the same Java or the same Vaadin script, I mean, is there any way? Does it always have to run on a single server? Is there any way to cluster that so that one server doesn't get overloaded?
Sure. So you can use a bunch of front-end servers. You should have some kind of load balancing proxy in the front, of course. And for those, we recommend to use sticky sessions. So then you direct always the request from one client to the same server. But it's also possible to do like cluster where you balance the load between the servers evenly. For example, we support Google App Engine where all the requests gets executed on different servers.
Right. Right. Now, I also wanted to ask you, while you guys are talking, I noticed that there's a link on the webpage to Pro. It says Pro. Is that the? I was saying you guys were kind of dancing around the monetization thing with a good idea from Randal there. But how do you make money with this? Is it basically a support model?
Yeah, we actually are doing a bunch of things. We came from professional services, so this is kind of the major part of the business at the moment. But we also have support subscriptions for developers. So basically on a developer basis, you can buy a support subscription we call Pro account. And then we have a bunch of add-on tools like that Vaadin test bench I mentioned earlier. And these are licensed tools. But we have been like really careful to keep the framework totally usable in its free form so that we don't kind of fool people to use this free framework and then they notice that, hey, they have to buy something. This is actually totally free for anybody to use for any kind of applications.
Right. I mean, it looks like, I'm just kind of reading it now, I mean, it looks like the tools here, it's not something that you can't live without, like in some of the other open core models where, you know, you get to a certain point and then, oh, I can't do this at all because I don't have this little widget that I need. It actually looks like, you know, you could implement that yourself, or you could go use these tools that we've already created. You know, they're kind of difficult to create, so we've done that for you and kind of get that as a benefit of the service.
Yeah, that's exactly what we are thinking. So we want to keep the totally free Apache license framework completely free for anybody to use, and then build a set of tools and services around it that where it just makes sense for companies to buy those tools and services. We don't want to force them, but we want to make them kind of as good value that it's really makes sense to buy those.
Right, right. For companies like a small company, it just makes sense to go pay for that service as opposed to hiring a bunch of people to write something yourself. I mean, that makes sense. How can you give an example of what those tools are that come in the Pro? I don't want you to give away any secret sauce or anything, but I mean, what's an example of something that a customer would get that they would pay for if they paid for the Pro model?
Yeah, for example, if you want to see all the tools, you can go Vaadin.com to the Pro page, and there's a list of those. But for actual tools, there is, for example, Vaadin TouchKit is a bunch of UI components that look and feel like iOS components. So if you want to build iPad applications with Vaadin, you can do that with the free version. But if you want to make those applications to look and feel like iPad applications and kind of get the like identical user experience to the native application, then you could buy Vaadin TouchKit to use those extra components. Also, there is a bunch of services like support services where you could ask questions, but also you could prioritize our tickets. You could say to a bug ticket in the database, hey, I need this fixed really, really fast, and we start to fix it for the paying customer.
Right. Right. And it looks like most of the tools that you have are actually on the free side. I mean, there's not, in terms of the number of tools, it looks like it's 95% of them are, especially the basic ones, are all available just in the open source version.
Yes, I think in the directory there are over 200 plugins, and out of those 200, under 10 are commercial. And even those commercial ones are actually dual licensed, so you could use the HTML version in open source projects for free. Right,
right. What about we touched on this a little bit, but in terms of what you need right now from the community, is there certain things that you're looking for that you would ask folks for help on right now? Certain plugins that need to be created, or certain contributions that you're looking for, or are you guys comfortable rolling all that in yourselves?
Nothing particular. I think two things are most interesting to us. Tutorials on how to integrate with different kind of technologies and different kind of languages. Our team haven't been using all the technologies around there, and it'd be great to have good how-tos, how to integrate Vaadin with technology X. Also, all the developers who are using Vaadin, I think at least most of them, they are building new components, new widgets in their projects. And it would be great if they could share those widgets so that the rest of the community could just reuse those.
Right. So it looks like, just building on that, how would people find out, like if they wanted to work on something, had questions? It looks like you have a forum. Do you have a forum mailing list? How do people actually get involved?
The main channel is forum. It's actually really reactive, so it's should be approachable by a new Vaadin developer.
I noticed the book you have there is actually pretty decent as well. Is that a collaborative project? How did that come about?
No, that's actually, I have a copy here. I don't know if you see that one. Yeah. So it's actually a real book, and the author, Marko Grönroos, has been working in our team for multiple years now writing the book. So we are putting a lot of effort in the documentation. So he's writing and updating the book as his main job.
And I noticed that you have a free PDF download as well as free HTML online, as well as having it be available in hard copy. That's admirable, I believe. That's very nice.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important for our framework that the documentation is high quality. Without the documentation, the feature is almost worthless if you don't know how to use it.
Now, do you have things like an IRC chat room?
I think the Skype channel is more active than the IRC at the moment. You could go to vaadin.com/chat, and there are links to both IRC chat rooms as well to the Skype chat. I haven't been using IRC myself too much. I think there are like 10 to 20 developers hanging there, and on Skype, maybe 120, 130 developers at all times.
I didn't realize that Skype could set up chat rooms. That shows how naive about Skype I am.
I think it's not too widely used feature, and it doesn't scale too nicely for chat rooms with 100 persons or so, but it's usable.
And how many people on that chat area are core developers as opposed to just third-party developers like us?
I don't know how many of our core developers hang there. Maybe the whole team is a bit less than 50 persons at the moment, so maybe 1/4 of the developers are hanging on those chat rooms.
Well, that's still good, though, because that means you get some authoritative answers if you have a question about something then.
Yeah, but I think the forum is the best way to get answers quite fast. And the good thing is that you have to formulate the question a bit better than on chats. And then the other persons also see that answer later. So it helps the whole community, not just the person who is asking the question.
Yeah, I get that when I see IRC chats as being sort of the only way people can ask questions, because then you run into problems of, how do I search? What do you do? Maintain IRC logs, which are full of usual miscellaneous trivia sometimes and stuff. So it is good to have that kind of forum available. Your team, are they all near you? Is this all a local company, or are you geographically distributed, or what?
Actually, this is really centralized. We are the whole team is in Finland. We're actually in process of opening offices in US at the moment, but this year everybody is working in Finland. And actually in the same office we have been trying hard to kind of get rid of smaller offices and get everybody around the same coffee maker. And it's really important for the team spirit, I think. I'm curious about that. So you're seeing that centralizing the development of this has helped for it? Yeah, it's two-edged sword, I would say. If we would have fully scattered team, I think it would work quite well. But if we would have most of the developers in the one place and then just some scattered developers in different locations, it might be challenging for those developers outside of the core location. And where is Vaadin in terms of its development cycle? Are you mature and usable, getting a little stale at the end because you've done everything you want, or still sort of on the early edge, bleeding edge adopters can go ahead and do it, but we may change a few things later? It's really mature. So we have been API backwards compatible since year 2002. We are kind of heading for the large enterprise applications, so we have to support long life cycles. I think they kind of Vaadin started to get publicity in 2009 with the Vaadin 6 version. So versions before that weren't used too widely, and then Vaadin 6 have been really, really successful and getting traction a lot. So we have been releasing 7 minor versions on top of that. We are really, really active releasing the versions, maybe maintenance version every 2 weeks and minor version every 3 months. And now we are finally getting in the stage where we are building the next major version, Vaadin 7. And we hope to get it out in 10 or 12 months. Okay, and where are you headed in the future? I mean, it sounds like the basic framework is there, and what's the big missings that you're going to have in, say, version 8? At the moment, we are more in a state of optimizing. This is actually quite large framework, and we have to support huge pile of different technologies to kind of get the UI layer done really, really well. So we want to make the development process even faster, make it even easier to learn, support mobile better. It's mostly about supporting new integrations and kind of polishing the framework at the moment. Okay. And you're obviously sticking with it personally, I presume. Sorry? You're sticking with it personally, I presume. You're staying with the company and still making it more and more mature then, right? Yeah, sure. Very cool. How did you said you've used Linux and stuff. That's sort of is that like your only exposure to open source, or do you have, are you like a long-time open source advocate or somewhere in between? I think I got introduced to open source maybe 15 or 12 years ago, or it must be even longer time. Mm-hmm. Oh gosh. I think Linux kernel was the first project that really kind of sucked me into open source. So I started with the Linux 0.2 version, and it was really interesting when it was small and you could read it through and understand quite a large part of it. And then kind of started to use it as a main operating system. I haven't been contributing too much in different projects. It's more like using the projects. So I would say that the Vaadin is the only kind of major project where I have been contributing to.
And I'm also curious, obviously part of your concern for this has to be future compatibility with both Java frameworks and with browser interfaces. What's your biggest concern there? And is there anything you could put out publicly asking the world to do on your behalf?
Really good question. It would be perfect if big companies would think in terms of technology more than business strategy. Now, in some cases, we have been seeing kind of nice technologies killed just because the companies want to lock in somehow. So that's maybe one of the requests that I could have.
In other words, you'd prefer to say Internet Explorer doesn't introduce too many non-compatible pieces of JavaScript then? From kind of everybody's point of view, it's good if IE would be much better. And actually, the new versions are brilliant when you're comparing to old versions. But at the same time, from kind of Vaadin projects and Vaadin company's perspective, it's good that there is a lot of incompatibility between the browsers. We are trying to solve that problem. If that problem would go away, there wouldn't be that much need for solutions like Vaadin. How do you handle that in the code, by the way? Is that something like most of the code doesn't care about it, but then at some level you have to have some universal library that then branches out depending on what browser it is?
On the server side, we don't care at all about the browsers. So all the browser compatibility things are done on the client side. And there we have two different things. We depend heavily on the Google Web Toolkit and its brilliant compiler that takes care of many of the compatibility issues for us. And then the widget set that we have built on top of Google Web Toolkit, it of course has to be supporting all the different browsers. So there are two layers, both the language layer done by the compiler as well as the DOM structures and the UI widgets CSS layer we have been building ourselves.
So I've got a couple questions. Just you guys have been chatting, and I've been thinking about some silly things. So the first one is the logo that you have on the homepage. Where did that come from? I mean, it's kind of an interesting. It has some coding elements to it, and also maybe some other elements. How did that come about?
Actually, it's one of the team members, Mark Englund, who came up with the idea for the logo. We wanted somehow kind of create a logo that will reflect our philosophy, kind of abstracting away from web. So we ended up putting that curly brace representing Java and some of the higher level languages before the greater than symbol, symbolizing the tags in HTML. So that's kind of one way of doing it, kind of seeing the logo. At the same time, if you think that the Vaadin means reindeer and you turn your head to left, you can see that the logo is actually a reindeer head. And thirdly, it's so simple that you can use it even as a shell prompt if you want to.
Right. No, I think it's brilliant. Once you mentioned the reindeer thing at the top of the show, I was kind of thinking that's what it was, but also the code tie-in I think is really, really cool. So kudos on the logo. Now, we didn't mention license specifically, or if we did, we missed it, but this is Apache, right?
Yes, Apache license.
Any reason for choosing Apache, or anything particular there, or you just thought that was the best way to go?
We actually started with LGPL and in year 2002, and it created some confusion. I think nowadays it wouldn't be creating that much confusion, but we wanted to kind of guarantee freedoms for the users. really, really big companies are building huge systems and putting huge investment on top of Vaadin. And I think the best guarantee we can give to them is that the license of the code is as permissive as Apache license is. So it's kind of guarantee at the same time.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, on behalf of all your users, thank you very much for using the Apache license. One more quick question I had is that I noticed in some of the information you sent over, you did your PhD in wavelet compression algorithms. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it actually has nothing to do with Vaadin, but...
Yeah, I was going to ask, how did you get from a PhD in wavelet compression algorithms over to this framework? I mean, it seems like a bit far off. I mean, it's not a big deal. I was just wondering. It seems to be quite a ways off of where you're at now.
I think it's the user story. When I was doing research for the wavelet compression algorithms, I got recruited in some part of my studies to lead this team for the virtual hospital, and in that project we got really, really deeply into web programming. So we kind of I had to put the PhD studies on hold for a while and do it as a weekend hobby.
Okay, that sort of seems like the typical, the people who aren't going to stay in research and they've gotten this really wonderful PhD in something, they have to do something for a job. So it sort of sounds like you had to eventually head that direction. So
yeah.
Great deal. We've chatted a bit, and I have a much better sense of Vaadin now that we've gone through the list of questions here. Is there anything we've left out that you want to make sure our audience is aware of?
I'm not sure. I think maybe first steps for starting with Vaadin.
Okay.
Of course, the book is really important to download that and start browsing, but if that 600-page book sounds like a bit scary thing, there is also a really nice ref card, basically 7-page kind of quick tutorial to Vaadin in D-Zone. So that's something worth looking at.
Yeah, and I just got to say too that the demo page. I know I mentioned it before, but I just love it when projects and companies have these demos and examples, and you can go there. And I was just looking, for example, at the calc example that you have there, and I love it because you can see the code and then you can just hit another button and run the app, and so it really gives you a really good easy way to get started on it. So I can't emphasize enough, that's a great place for people to start if they just want to learn a little bit more about how to structure an application.
Also, there is in vaadin.com/learn there is a 9-minute video that kind of walks you through building a simple Vaadin application. It might be interesting on seeing how to build the application from scratch line by line and what kind of results you can get in 9 minutes.
I like that you included all the typos that you made in that video.
Actually, it is fun. I was recording the video in aeroplane trip, and that's the one reason why it doesn't have any sound. And I kind of promised to myself I'll redo the video in a really, really soon and with the sound, but it has been there for over 1 year already.
So I'm thinking it's a 9-minute video with about 1.5 minutes of hitting backspace. So
yeah,
you could probably make it shorter. You wouldn't even get it down to 5 minutes. I don't know. There was quite a lot of little typos in there, but I thought that was you were just really showing the rough thing. You were showing this is a raw thing that we've created. I also like that you actually have it scaled down. You have like a 3-minute tutorial and a short tutorial and a medium tutorial and a long tutorial and the full book. So you've really thought a lot about how to get people transitioned from here. Besides knowing Java, what other skills do I need before I come into being able to play with this?
I think Java is the only one that you have to know. So we have been really, really careful to kind of make it easy for non-web developers to build web applications. So you don't have to know anything about HTML or CSS or anything like that. Just some basic Java will do. And of course, if you prefer some other language like Scala or Groovy, then you can use those too.
We didn't talk about that at all, but how compatible is this? Can I get to most of this from JRuby?
I think so. I haven't been using JRuby myself. So basically, it just depends on JVM. So everything that can be called from a Java library from any other language is doable. And I think for the most languages on top of JVM, they can call Java libraries. So for some kind of languages, the APIs might look a bit funny, but for most languages, they are quite okay.
Oh, good, because there's a couple new Smalltalk implementations that are running directly on the JVM. So this will be interesting. I can program all this in Smalltalk, my preferred language. So that'd be fun. Cool. Okay, anything else that we've left out? It sounds like we've covered a lot of things here. So.
Yeah, I think we have been covering everything important here. Actually, one funny thing, because there are a lot of listeners that know of a lot of languages. So if you know some language that's not too common, it might be fun to try to do some Hello World or calculator type of example with that language. I have even seen like COBOL and Lisp used for Vaadin programming, and it is quite strange to see those type of languages used for rich web programming.
You know, maybe we can have a job for all those old COBOL programmers that came back in the year 2000. Now they get program in COBOL under Vaadin and create rich web desktop applications. Nice.
Yeah, maybe we should skip that idea.
Well, okay, I got to ask my standard questions, although I don't know how well they apply to somebody who's mostly in Java. But Emacs or VI?
Emacs. I have tried to learn VI for a long time, but I haven't been too successful in that.
Yeah, you just made my day. You made my day. The next one I'm not going to win on, I'm pretty sure, though. What's your favorite scripting language?
JavaScript. I think I must admit that even though our value prop is that you don't have to do any JavaScript, I like the language.
Okay. Okay, well that's a fair cup. I was actually going to talk about something like Unix command line language, but okay, JavaScript will qualify. I'll just leave you at that. Joonas, it's been a really pleasure having you on the show today, talking about this very important, very interesting, powerful web language. And so, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Very good, very good. Well, that was Joonas Lehtinen. He said it better in the beginning of the show. He's talking about his Vaadin framework, and really interesting. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to compare all these frameworks that are popping up now, between, things like Ruby on Rails and Node.js, and it's just kind of like, there's this bag of tools now that web and application developers have to go use. And so I think the more the merrier. I think it's really great. At first I was a little concerned that this was another open core kind of project, but it doesn't seem so to me at all. It seems like, they've developed a good way to make some money based on their efforts. And, that's great. I mean, there's nothing in the open source ethos that says you can't make money on top of your efforts. So I think that they've done a really good job at that, and I think they're really trying hard, as we mentioned, with their use of the Apache license, for example, to keep things user-friendly and keep it so that the users can pick up the code if they need to and use it in other places and in other ways. So I think it's great.
Well, I also like the fact that they seem to be supporting 50 fins. I don't know if that's cheaper there, or maybe it is a little bit cheaper in Finland. But so whatever they're doing the right thing, because it's supporting the people that need to be developing at least the core parts of it. I also, as he said earlier, it's interesting how many of these projects, how close the web is going back to essentially being the old desktop client server model, where you have a smart server that's doing all the hard work, and your clients are basically very thin clients. As you even mentioned, the X11 model, where you're actually able to just have rich displays to be able to put up the information in really nice ways. And I know we've covered a number of these frameworks, including my favorite Seaside for this, Arena. But Vaadin has some very compelling things about it. The fact that it's been around for almost a decade, and the fact that it's Java, which means you can interface it and hook it up with everything else that might be Java side, server side.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good way to take example of some of the Java resources out there. And, quite frankly, I hadn't really heard about it before today. I may have seen the name in a post somewhere or something like that, but hadn't really heard much about it. So I'm glad that we were able to get him on and talk a little bit more openly about it. Hopefully people take advantage of the great tools and resources and books and everything else that they've put together to go try it out and see whether it makes sense.
Well, yeah, and just like you said earlier in the show, the fact that there's this really great, rich demo page, I was impressed. I went, well, I could certainly see building some applications even here at the current client location that might need to have this sort of rich interface, thing. And they are actually using Java for some of this stuff already, so that means it wouldn't be hard to drop that in. And so it's very cool. And also speaking about that, I did not know about this project either. The project leader wrote me, Joonas wrote me, and based on some nodding, I guess, from one of his community members, and said, please put me on the show. And that is how most of the people get on the show these days, as I keep saying over and over again. Speaking of people on the show, let's go ahead and look at the upcoming guest list. You can always check this list out by going to twit.tv/floss, and it's linked right from there. We have, next week, we have Web2Pi, Massimo Di Piero. I should move to Europe so I know how to pronounce all these names. I think it's going to be the thing that's just going to keep driving me nuts. I should ask all these guests, how do you pronounce your name so I can say it over and over again and mangle it on each end of each show. Web2Pi, which is a Python web framework. So if you want a little more modern scripting language and not Java for doing your programming, I hear that's fairly heavily used, so it should be fun talking to him. Follow up, Jeffrey Thalhammer, who I met in person about 6 months ago. He is the author of Perl Critic. Now, Perl Critic analyzes your Perl programs by parsing them and figuring out if you're doing the kinds of things that people shouldn't be doing in Perl programs, with various levels of settings to say, well, I don't ever want to use a variable that's not declared with my within the same scope and stuff, and it actually figures that stuff out. I'm very excited to be talking to him because I think that one of the things Perl Critic does is when people get worried about Perl, they often get worried about, well, but how do we gauge the quality of our larger applications? You know, we don't want people doing things that are outside, say, the really great book on Perl best practices. We don't want stuff going outside that. Well, Perl Critic can actually enforce that and say you have to be complying with everything in Perl best practices, or at least most things anyway. So I'm really glad we're going to be chatting with him. After that, we've added a bunch of new names since the last time I read this list. It's because I've been working behind the scenes to plug all these people in, even on my 4-week break there. We've got Antonio Scuri, who is going to speak to us from Brazil, I believe, on sort of the Universal Interface project. So basically creating GUIs in multiple languages. His particular aspect of it is Lua, so we'll get a little bit about what Lua is about as well. But also you can do things, I guess, in a couple of languages whose now I don't remember what they are, but they should be great. After that, we've got Thomas S. Hatch, which is Salt. And I can't remember what Salt. Oh, yes, I know what Salt is. Salt is a distributed...
It's a seasoning.
It's a seasoning, right? It's NaCl, that's chemical symbols, right? Now, sodium chloride, right? No, it's not sodium chloride. It's, in fact, it's a way of distributing processing across multiple machines with a queue system built in the middle and proper reporting and failover and all sorts of great things. So if you have lots and lots of little tasks that all have to get done, you can farm them out to your processor farm, and it just figures all that out. It looks really interesting, actually. Again, another one that wrote me like just recently, and I edited him on the schedule for that. We also have James Tauber, who's going to talk to us about Pinax, and I believe Pinax is a web framework? No, it's not a web framework. What the hell was it? All right. I don't remember. Anyway, it's great. We'll love it when we get up there. David Mirza, who I met in Brazil, has written this really amazingly cool security tester for websites called the Vega Security Tester. Open source, but it also is a really great product as well. He's hoping to build some money around the practice of actually testing websites for stuff. But you can actually just play with it right away and go out and test your website where you can find common vulnerability stuff. It's basically a framework for doing that sort of stuff. And finally, rounding out the list for Q4, as far as we've looked at so far, we have Kleber Rosa, who's going to talk to us about Autotest, which is one of the testing frameworks for testing very large applications and real-time applications, things like that. So that should be a lot of fun. So lots of people on the list. Again, if you go to twit.tv/floss, you can see the link to our upcoming guests. If you have a person on the list, or a person who's not on the list, if you have a person on the list, it doesn't really matter because I've already talked to them. But if a person that's not on the list, or a project that's not on the list that you really want us to talk to as we start booking a Q1, which will probably be starting in about 3 or 4 weeks or so, then have the project leader email me, merlin@stonehenge.com, and I will be in contact with them about how they get on the show. We also have, if you want to know when we announce new guests and things, we are both tweeting and denting on Floss Weekly, all one word. So I post there frequently to talk about what's coming up on the show. If you want to find out where I am, all the different places that I'm going, especially if you would have watched the last 3 weeks, you would have seen all the different places in Europe I was at. You can follow me on Merlin, M-E-R-L-Y-N on Twitter. I'm also on Google+, Randal Schwartz. I don't think there's any other Randal Schwartzes, but there might be. But just look for the one who's posting about 10 or 12 things a day that are humorous and cool. It'll probably be me. speaking of going in Europe, I had a great time on my cruise over the last 3 weeks. So it was a 12-day cruise. I ended up going to 2 new countries I hadn't been to before. I went to Bulgaria and Ukraine. I went to a couple places in Ukraine. I went to Bulgaria. It was really fascinating. I got to see the place where the Yalta Conference happened. That was the agreement between, there goes my history. I can't remember who the people were. Churchill, Roosevelt, and somebody from the Soviet Union, the other guy. Anyway, so I got to see the actual table they sat at. I got pictures of that. I'll have all those pictures up on Flickr. I'll let you know. It's not up yet, but probably the next couple of weeks. I have something like 200 pictures I took a day up there. Also, my just as another reference, again, if you've been following me on Twitter and stuff, my 50th birthday is coming up. And I've decided that for my 50th birthday, I'm going to start growing a beard for the first time in my life. So if I start looking scruffy slightly after, if I start looking like Aaron a few weeks after the week I'm gone, that's the week of Thanksgiving, by the way. So if I start looking scruffy, also, apparently I need to learn grooming tips. I have never had a beard, so I don't know what it sounds like. It's actually more difficult than shaving every day. So I don't know. Aaron, what is it?
Well, is it going to be a neck beard?
What does that mean?
That means the hair grows all the way down here. Are you going to do the neck beard thing, or are you going to, do the real trimmed, sleek design here, or maybe the goatee like I've got?
I haven't thought about any of this. The most important thing I'm going to do is just let it grow out and see where it doesn't show up on my face. That's most of, because I remember growing a mustache about 20 years ago, and it was like splotchy. So I have a feeling it's probably just going to be splotchy, and I know it's going to be gray based on the shavings I've had every day. So that's going to be weird. I'll be an actual gray beard. And actually, let me take a moment to say this. I'm really saddened by the passing of Dennis Ritchie recently, and because I've had email exchanges with him back in the early days, and he actually told me the email that he sent me was about some subject about Unix security back in the early days. And his piece of email was one that told me that glob.c was the very first thing ever written in C for Unix. It was the thing that expanded star out to all of its matching things. Everything else was an assembler in Unix before that. So it was pretty cool to be able to chat, have email exchange. It's unfortunately, it's buried on a, get this, 9-track tape somewhere in my archives. So chances of me finding and pulling it out anytime soon is going to be tough, but very sad about it. So anyway, to sort of bring back in one more gray beard, I'm going to be trying that out at least for a little while. I'm moving a bunch of.
I just have to echo that. That was a really big loss to the Unix, Linux, and pretty much everybody that uses the internet or a computer was touched in some way by him. I had a great conversation about him with Doug McElroy, and you can actually view part of that interview on thesourceshow.org. But had a great conversation with him about those early days of Unix and what they were doing. It was really, as I think, as revolutionary as a lot of the things that have happened over the past 5 or 10 years in mobile.
Well, even the White C Bible was one of my models for being able to write the way I do. I mean, the clarity and the way that the C was presented in the original book, and I know Richie wrote that book. So very happy to have at least had indirect contact with him and at least one direct email exchange with him before his passing. So really cool on that. So sorry to hear he's gone. And speaking of that, you mentioned the Source Show. What else are you doing, Aaron?
Yeah, so go to thesourceshow.org. I've got an upcoming episode coming out in the next few days about my experiences at East Bay Mini Maker Faire. Some really cool stuff on that episode. And I'm working on another project probably soon after that I can't really talk about. It involves a certain 4-letter acronym for an organization that has to do with space and stuff like that. You can probably guess what it is.
Unix?
No, space, like the real space, not like, So anyway, you can guess who that is, but that's going to be coming up after that. And of course, you can always connect with me on Google+. That's my preferred way of communicating with folks. So if you're not on Google+, be sure to join up. It's free. It's open for everybody. So go out there, join up on Google+, and add me to your circles. Circle me. And get in touch with me that way. That's really the best way to follow me these days.
Very cool. Yeah, and as you mentioned, there's no need now. You can stop sending me the requests for invites. It should just be obvious. Just go to the page, get signed up. It's all very good. But I didn't mind sending out about, I guess like 600 invites. I guess that was pretty cool. I guess that probably means I sort of bootstrapped my circle following. So that was kind of nice. I got something like 7,000 followers now, which is really cool. Yeah. I think it's because I keep saying things. I keep saying nice things. And if you haven't found out about Plusist, by the way, that allows you to connect your Google Plus over to other services like Facebook and Twitter. So I've been using Plusist, and so I've been able to post to Google Plus, and immediately it also shows up on my Twitter stream actually about 10 minutes later. So it's indispensable for that. So, but you know what, Aaron? I'm hearing that music come up. You know what that means? We simply run out of time one more time, but we'll be back again next week on FLOSS Weekly.